Okay, so here's a pairing you probably never thought you'd hear in the same sentence. Evangelical Christianity and electronic dance music. But believe it or not, this unlikely duo has some surprisingly deep roots and a pretty complex philosophy that we're about to unpack.
So let's just start with a scene that sounds almost impossible. I want you to picture Ibiza, the global capital of clubbing, just packed with people. Now picture evangelical missionaries right there in the middle of it all. This isn't some made-up story, it's actually happening. Which brings us to the big question, what in the world are they doing there?
And hey, this isn't just some random anecdote. It's actually the subject of serious academic research. We're talking fieldwork done in dance music hotspots like Ibiza and New York, to really get to the bottom of why certain Christian groups are embedding themselves in club culture. To figure this out, we need to go back in time.
So how did we get here? How do you even begin to unpack this? Well, to understand what's happening on the dance floors of Ibiza today, we actually have to rewind the clock.
And I don't just mean a few years. We are going way back to the 1960s. Because, believe it or not, the story of evangelicals in today's EDM clubs doesn't start with house music. Nope. It starts with the hippie counterculture and the birth of rock and roll, that first massive collision between modern youth culture and evangelical faith.
And this collision, it sparked something totally new. It was called the Jesus People movement, a really radical youth-focused spiritual revival that grew directly out of the West Coast hippie scene in the late 60s.
And check out how this thing grew. I mean, it started super small in 1966 with a coffeehouse ministry for hippies right in San Francisco. But then, boom, by 1971, it had crossed the Atlantic and was getting major attention. And just a few years after that, by 1974, it had its own major cultural hub, the Greenbelt Festival, a place designed specifically for mixing faith with contemporary art and music.
So what was their playbook? How did they pull this off? Well, they went all in. They completely adopted the counterculture look and feel. Psychedelic art, Bibles written in street language, folk rock music, the whole shebang. The really crucial idea here was to see youth culture not as the enemy, but as a mission field, a new place to go into and connect with people on their own terms.
But you can probably guess this radical new approach, it did not go over well with everyone. Not at all. In fact, it kicked off this huge controversy inside the church that just raged for decades, the Great Christian Rock Debate.
And at the very heart of it was this classic, timeless theological puzzle. If you use the music and the style of a secular culture to spread your message, are you actually being effective? Or are you just watering down your faith? Where exactly do you draw that line? This whole debate basically split evangelicals into two main camps. On one side, you've got the separational view. For them, the world is sinful, period, and the line between it and the church has to be super sharp and clear. Music is only okay if it's explicitly a tool for ministry. But then on the other side, you've got the transformational view. These folks argue that God can actually work through secular culture. For them, music can be art for its own sake. Its value isn't just about how many people it converts.
And when I say the opposition was intense, I mean it was intense. This quote from an anti-rock writer pretty much sums it up. For the critics, this wasn't just about musical taste. It was a full-on spiritual war. They thought Christian rock wasn't just bad, it was literally the music of the Antichrist. Yeah, that's how high the stakes felt.
So, as this whole rock debate kept going, a new idea started to bubble up. People started thinking, okay, instead of just putting Christian lyrics over rock music, what if we could create totally new immersive worship experiences using the tools of modern culture?
And this led to the birth of what they called alternative worship. And that term, it was actually coined at the Greenbelt Festival. Yep, that same experimental hub we talked about earlier. The key idea was to intentionally engage with culture outside the traditional church building.
So what does alternative worship actually look like in practice? Well, it means using everything from film to DJs. The focus shifts to multisensory, physical experiences like dancing, and the location itself moves from a church sanctuary to a cafe, a public park, or even a club. This whole approach fundamentally blows up that old, rigid line between what's sacred and what's secular.
Which brings us full circle, right back to where we started, Ibiza. Now with all that history in our back pocket, we can finally understand the thinking behind an evangelical presence in a superclub. They aren't just crashing the party. They're coming from a very specific theological and historical point of view. Okay, so here's the million-dollar question. How on earth do they justify using secular EDM, Music that's often all about hedonism for worship. The answer lies in this really radical idea about where meaning actually comes from. The core belief is that a song's meaning isn't set in stone by the artist. Instead, the meaning is created right there in the moment by the person listening, or in this case, the person dancing.
And here's the 4-step playbook for how that works. First, you find a track with ambiguous, uplifting lyrics, something like "Love is the message." Second, you basically decide that whatever the DJ or artist originally meant doesn't matter. Third, you actively reinterpret that love as divine love from God. And finally, you use the music's immersive, powerful vibe to create a transcendent worship experience through dance.
So what's the endgame here? It's all about transformation. The idea is that by reinterpreting the music, you can actually transform the space itself. That nightclub, the ultimate secular venue, becomes, for a moment, a potential place for a sacred experience. For just a little while, that line between the church and the world completely dissolves.
This whole story, from 1960s coffee shops to today's superclubs, is really about one thing: adaptation. And it leaves us with a really powerful final question. As our culture keeps shifting and changing, where might we see these kinds of intersections of faith and secular life pop up next? What's going to be the next mission field? Something to think about. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks for diving in with me.